The galaxy had changed. For centuries, the Zorathian Empire stood as a symbol of strength, knowledge, and dominance over the stars. Their technology was advanced, their military unmatched, and their control over countless planets was unquestioned. The Zorathians ruled the galaxy from their gleaming capital city on the planet Zorath, a place where towering skyscrapers made of unknown metals reached into the sky, and the streets were illuminated by lights brighter than any human could imagine. The people, with their sharp features and powerful builds, were known across the stars for their elegance and power. And yet, despite all their grandeur, the Zorathians were facing a problem. They had never encountered a race like humanity. The humans were primitive, they thought, fragile, easily defeated, and no match for the power of the Zorathian Empire. At least, that's what the Zorathians believed. It was a diplomatic mission that had brought the human to Zorath. He was not a soldier or a conqueror, but an envoy. His mission was simple: to establish a formal relationship between the humans and the Zorathian Empire, to prove that humanity could be a valuable ally, not an enemy. But as he stepped off the transport ship and onto the cold surface of the alien planet, he could not have known just how much his arrival would shake the foundations of the Zorathian world. The human was not what the Zorathians had expected. His appearance was nothing spectacular. He was tall, dressed in simple but functional clothes, and his face held an expression of quiet confidence. His eyes, though, were different. There was a fire in them that the Zorathians would later come to recognize as the spark of human ambition. As he walked through the grand palace of the Zorathian royal family, he noticed the strange combination of ancient and futuristic elements that decorated the walls. The palace was filled with delicate carvings of past Zorathian emperors, yet at the same time, there were holographic displays showing the latest technological advancements. The floors were made of a shimmering substance that seemed to change color with every step, and the air was filled with the scent of unknown flowers that the humans had never encountered before. The palace was alive with the hustle and bustle of Zorathian life. Guards stood at attention, their weapons gleaming in the light. Servants scurried about, delivering food and supplies to the royal family. The atmosphere was one of quiet power, where every movement and every word was measured. And yet, as the human made his way through the halls, no one seemed to pay him any attention. He was just another foreign diplomat, expected to follow the rules and respect the customs of the Zorathians. But he had no intention of doing that. As the human entered the grand hall where the royal family held court, his footsteps echoed through the marble floor, drawing the attention of the few who were present. The hall was filled with Zorathian nobles and advisors, each of them dressed in intricate robes made from the finest materials of the galaxy. The air was thick with conversation as the members of the royal court discussed matters of great importance, matters of war, peace, and power. But when the human stepped into the room, everything stopped. The Zorathian princess, who sat at the head of the table, turned to face the intruder. Her eyes widened in shock. She was unlike any other Zorathian. Tall, with skin as pale as moonlight and dark, flowing hair that cascaded over her shoulders, she was the epitome of Zorathian beauty and grace. But it wasn't her beauty that caused the human to pause. It was the power that radiated from her. She was the heir to the throne, the future ruler of the empire. The princess had been prepared for many things: diplomatic meetings, formal introductions, and even some minor confrontations. But nothing could have prepared her for the audacity of a human entering the royal palace without invitation, without ceremony. She stared at him for a long moment, as though unsure whether she had seen him properly. Her surprise was obvious, her eyes filled with disbelief. The room fell silent. The nobles and advisors watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. No one had ever dared to interrupt the princess in such a way, least of all a human. The guards stood at attention, their hands hovering near the hilts of their weapons, waiting for orders. But the human did not wait for permission. He stepped forward, his gaze locked onto the princess. "I am here to speak," he said, his voice calm, steady, and filled with an unwavering confidence. "You've heard of humanity, I presume?" The princess's mouth parted slightly as she processed his words. She had been prepared for formalities, for speeches filled with respect and deference. But this was different. The human wasn't afraid. He wasn't trembling in awe of the Zorathian Empire. Instead, he spoke as though he were an equal. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "And what is the meaning of this intrusion?" The human gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that suggested he had expected this reaction. "I am an envoy of humanity," he replied. "And I'm here to speak with you, princess." The princess bristled at his tone, at his confidence. She had never encountered anyone who spoke to her in such a manner. Her advisors shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to handle the situation. The princess, however, was not one to be easily intimidated. She had been trained from birth to lead the Zorathian Empire, to command respect and authority. And yet, standing before her now, the human seemed impervious to her power. "I do not appreciate being spoken to in such a way," she said, her voice hardening. The human did not flinch. "I understand," he said, "but I think you will appreciate my message, princess." The tension in the room was palpable. The princess's eyes narrowed as she regarded the human, trying to make sense of him. How could a race as young and primitive as humanity have the audacity to approach the Zorathians like this? What could they possibly offer her empire? What could they possibly offer her? "Then speak," she said, her voice cold but curious. The human took a deep breath and began. He spoke of humanity's past, of their struggles and triumphs, of their battles and victories, of the way they had risen from a single planet to become a force to be reckoned with in the galaxy. He spoke of their discoveries, their technology, their potential. And most importantly, he spoke of their strength, the strength that came from their unity, their will to survive, and their determination to overcome any obstacle. The princess listened, her expression unreadable. She had heard many speeches in her time, many diplomats and envoys trying to impress her with tales of their civilizations. But there was something different about this human. There was a fire in his eyes, an intensity that made her question everything she had believed about humanity. When he finished speaking, the princess remained silent. She stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing. The human had dared to enter her palace without invitation, without respect for the protocols that governed her world. And yet, he had spoken with such conviction that she could not dismiss him outright. He had done something no one else had ever done. He had made her question her assumptions. "Why have you come here?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I've come to offer an alliance," the human said, his gaze unwavering. "An alliance between humanity and the Zorathian Empire." The princess's eyes widened. She had expected many things, but this was unexpected. Humanity was offering something she had never considered. The Zorathian Empire had never needed alliances before. They were the rulers of the galaxy. But now, for the first time, the princess found herself facing a human who was not afraid of her, who was not intimidated by the power of the Zorathian Empire. Instead, he stood before her, offering a partnership between two species that had never before considered one another as equals. The princess's mind whirled. She had heard of humanity's potential, their rapid rise in the galaxy. But she had never considered them a threat, until now. Now she wasn't so sure. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of unease. Was humanity truly the fragile species she had been led to believe, or was there more to them than met the eye? And if there was more to them, what would that mean for the future of the Zorathian Empire? She didn't know. But she knew one thing for certain: the human had made an impression. And that was something no one had ever done before. The human envoy had left the grand hall, but his presence lingered in the air like a heavy fog. The princess, still shaken by his audacity and his words, couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something significant. The room had returned to its usual activities, but her mind was far from calm. She walked alone through the palace corridors, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. She had expected an easy encounter, a routine meeting with an inferior species. But instead, the human had not only interrupted her royal duties, but had dared to speak to her as though they were equals. She, the princess of the Zorathian Empire, the future ruler of the galaxy, had been treated as though she were just another participant in a diplomatic conversation, not someone whose authority should be unquestioned. Her advisors, of course, were quick to dismiss the human's behavior. "A simpleton," they said, "no match for our empire." But the princess couldn't quite rid herself of the unease his words had caused. She had heard of humanity, how they had risen from their humble beginnings to create a galactic civilization of their own, how they had managed to unite different species under one banner. She had thought it was all exaggerated, the stuff of myths and rumors. But now, after meeting the human envoy, she was unsure. Sitting in her private chamber, she studied the reports her advisors had given her about humanity. The Zorathian Empire had always been a closed, self-sufficient civilization. They ruled through strength, intellect, and a history that stretched back thousands of years. In all that time, they had never needed an alliance, never sought help from anyone else. They had always believed they were the superior race in the galaxy, and anyone else was beneath them. But this human, this envoy from a species that had only recently begun to explore the stars, had offered her something that was not easy to dismiss: an alliance. At first, the princess had scoffed at the idea. What could a race like humanity offer her? But the more she thought about it, the more intrigued she became. The human envoy had spoken of human resilience, of their ability to adapt and survive, even in the face of overwhelming odds. He had spoken of the potential of their technologies, their military innovations, and their vast networks of influence across many worlds. For the first time, the princess found herself considering the possibility that humanity was more than just a fleeting, insignificant species. The princess leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the cold metal of her desk. She had always prided herself on her ability to remain in control of situations, to foresee every possible outcome and maneuver accordingly. But now, she felt out of her depth. She had not anticipated this. She had not anticipated a human with such courage, such intelligence, and such ambition. What did this mean for her people? What did this mean for the future of the galaxy? Just as she was deep in thought, one of her trusted advisors entered the room. He was an older Zorathian, a man who had served her family for many years. His face, though aged, still held the sharpness of his youth. His presence was always steady, never shaken by anything. "Your Highness," he said respectfully, bowing slightly. "I trust the meeting with the human envoy went well." The princess looked up at him, her gaze thoughtful. "Did you know, Baal, that humanity has managed to unite several worlds under their banner?" she asked quietly. "They've built an empire of their own, one that stretches across the stars. How is that possible? How can such a young species accomplish what we have struggled with for millennia?" Baal looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly in surprise. "I've heard the rumors, Princess, but never did I think they would be true. We've always considered humanity a primitive race, not worthy of our attention. They've never been able to match our strength or our intellect." The princess stood and walked to the large window overlooking the city below. The view was breathtaking, gleaming towers that stretched into the clouds, ships flying overhead, and the bustling life of the Zorathian capital. She looked at the humans' world through the lens of what she had always known, but now she saw it differently. Could humanity really be a threat to them, or was there something more to them than she had ever imagined? "Tell me, Baal," she said, her voice soft but firm. "What is your opinion of the human envoy? Do you believe they are truly as powerful as he claims?" Baal hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. "I believe they are dangerous, Your Highness," he said finally. "Not in the sense that they pose an immediate threat to our empire, but in their potential. A species that has grown so rapidly, that has overcome so much, cannot be ignored. If they are left unchecked, they could become a force we cannot easily defeat." The princess turned to face him, her eyes narrowed. "So you think we should ally with them, or destroy them?" "I think we should proceed with caution," Baal replied carefully. "We do not know their true intentions, nor do we know what they are capable of. But we cannot afford to dismiss them either. An alliance could be beneficial, but only if we are in control." The princess nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had always prided herself on being a master strategist, able to see the bigger picture, to weigh every option carefully. But this situation was different. The human envoy had thrown her off balance, forcing her to reconsider everything she had known about the galaxy. As the days passed, the princess found herself growing more and more curious about humanity. She had asked her advisors to gather information, to learn everything they could about this strange species. She wanted to know how they had risen so quickly, how they had united so many worlds, and what their true capabilities were. She needed to know if an alliance with them would be beneficial, or if it would be their downfall. Meanwhile, the human envoy had remained in the palace, awaiting word from the princess. He was confident, as he always was. But even he couldn't have known just how much his visit had affected the Zorathian princess. The more he learned about her, the more he realized that this was a rare opportunity, one that could change the course of human history. On the fourth day after his arrival, the princess sent for him. The message was short and to the point. "Come to the royal chambers. We have matters to discuss." The human arrived promptly, as expected. His posture was relaxed, yet his eyes betrayed a sense of anticipation. He knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when the princess would either accept or reject his offer of an alliance. The princess stood by the window again, looking out over the city. She didn't turn when he entered. She had become accustomed to making her visitors wait, to show them that they were on her time, not the other way around. But the human wasn't like the others. He didn't seem bothered by her silence. "Your Highness," he said, his voice respectful but confident. "I trust you've had time to consider my offer." The princess turned to face him, her gaze steady. "I have," she replied, "and I've come to a conclusion." The human's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or not. "I've heard your words," she continued, "and I see the potential in humanity, but I need to know something. What exactly do you want from us? You've come here offering an alliance, but what does humanity truly stand to gain from it?" The human smiled, a genuine expression this time. "What we want, princess, is simple. We want a place in the galaxy, an equal place. We don't want to be inferior to anyone. We want to stand alongside the greatest powers in the universe, not beneath them." The princess looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And what makes you think we would accept such an offer? Why should we risk our empire for a race as young and untested as humanity?" "Because, Your Highness," the human replied, stepping closer, "we may be young, but we've survived against all odds. We have the will to fight, the drive to push forward, and the intelligence to make our mark. And if you help us, we can make your empire even stronger than it is now." The princess's eyes locked with his. For the first time since their meeting, she wasn't sure what to make of him. There was something about this human, something that intrigued her. She had always thought she was in control, but now she was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, humanity was the key to something greater. "Let us see," she said finally. "Let us see what humanity can truly offer." The following days were a blur for the princess. Her thoughts were consumed with the human envoy and his bold proposal. She had spent much of her life being told that the Zorathian Empire was the pinnacle of power in the galaxy. She had been taught that the Zorathians were the superior species, unmatched in intellect, strength, and strategy. But this human, this representative of a species so young and seemingly unremarkable, had shaken her beliefs to their core. The princess had always prided herself on her ability to maintain control, to be composed and poised in the face of any challenge. Yet, in the presence of the human envoy, she felt something she had never experienced before, a sense of uncertainty. It wasn't fear, no. It was something deeper, something that made her question everything she had known about her place in the universe. She had ordered her advisors to gather more intelligence about humanity, hoping to find some flaw, some weakness that would explain why this human was so confident. She had hoped to find something that would allow her to dismiss his offer as nothing more than an audacious bluff. But every report she received only seemed to confirm one thing: humanity was not to be underestimated. It wasn't just their resilience that intrigued her. It was their adaptability, their ability to learn and grow faster than any species she had ever encountered. Humanity was not a perfect species. No race was, but their potential was undeniable. The princess could see that now. And that realization made her feel both a sense of awe and a sense of dread. On the third day after their last meeting, the princess called for the human envoy again. This time, she had made a decision. She had carefully considered his proposal, weighed the benefits and risks, and come to the conclusion that an alliance might indeed be worth pursuing. However, she could not make this decision lightly. She had to test the human. She had to see if he was truly worthy of the trust she was about to place in him. The human arrived promptly, as always. His presence in the palace had become a regular occurrence, and each time he entered the room, the princess could not help but notice how confident he was. He didn't cower before her as many others did. He didn't seek her approval. He simply stood there waiting for her to speak. It was both maddening and fascinating. "Envoy," the princess said, her voice cold and formal as she motioned for him to sit. "I have considered your offer, and I have decided that we will move forward with negotiations, but I will not simply trust your words. I need to see for myself what humanity is capable of." The human raised an eyebrow, but his expression remained unchanged. He had expected this. The Zorathians were not the type to make decisions without testing their allies first. "I understand, Princess," he said calmly. "What would you have me do?" "You will participate in a trial," the princess said. "A test to prove that humanity has what it takes to stand beside the Zorathians as an equal. If you succeed, we will proceed with the alliance. If you fail, well, I will consider it a lesson that humanity still has much to learn." The human's gaze remained steady as he listened. He knew the princess was not speaking out of malice, but out of a need for assurance. She needed to see that humanity was capable of more than just words. He had no doubt that he could pass any trial she set before him. But he also knew that this would be his opportunity to prove to her that humanity was not a species to be dismissed. The princess stood and walked over to a nearby table, where a holographic display flickered to life. "We have arranged a simulation," she explained. "A battle simulation designed to test strategy, intelligence, and adaptability. You will be placed in a simulated environment where you will have to face a series of challenges. You will have limited resources, and you will have to rely on your wits and your ability to think on your feet." The human nodded. This was exactly the kind of challenge he had expected. "I accept." The princess motioned for one of her advisors to initiate the simulation. The room around them seemed to shift, and suddenly the human found himself standing in a large, open field. The sky was a deep, reddish color, and the ground beneath his feet was cracked and dry, as though it had not seen water in centuries. Strange, alien structures loomed in the distance, their shapes unlike anything the human had ever seen. It was clear that this was not a simulation of Earth. It was something far more alien, a test designed to challenge him in ways he couldn't yet understand. A voice, mechanical and detached, spoke from nowhere. "Simulation initialized. Objective, survive and complete the mission. You will face various threats. Your success will depend on your ability to adapt and utilize the environment." The human took a deep breath. He knew this was a test, and he wasn't about to fail. His mind raced, thinking through the possible dangers and how he could use his surroundings to his advantage. He was accustomed to being in high-stress situations, to thinking on his feet and making quick decisions. This was just another challenge to him, and he would face it the same way he had faced all the others, with determination and resourcefulness. He surveyed the area around him, quickly taking stock of the alien terrain. He spotted several large, jagged rocks that could provide cover, as well as a strange-looking plant with bright red flowers. The plant's petals seemed to shimmer in the strange light of the sky. There were no obvious weapons or tools in sight, but the human knew better than to rely on what was immediately available. He would need to be resourceful. As he began to move cautiously toward the rocks, the ground beneath him suddenly trembled. The human barely had time to react before a massive creature, a large reptilian beast with glowing eyes and sharp claws, burst from behind a nearby hill. It charged toward him with terrifying speed, its jaws snapping as it roared. The human barely managed to duck behind a rock in time, his heart racing. He had faced dangerous animals before, but nothing like this. This creature was fast, deadly, and relentless. The human's first instinct was to run, to flee to safety. But he quickly realized that running would only make him an easier target. He needed to outsmart the creature, to use the environment to his advantage. He glanced around, spotting a narrow opening in the rocks to his left. It was a tight space, but it could provide the cover he needed. He moved quickly, keeping low to the ground, and darted toward the opening. The creature followed him, its heavy footsteps thundering behind him. As the human reached the opening, he turned and waited. When the creature was nearly upon him, he sprang into action, luring it into the narrow gap between the rocks. The creature, unable to stop its momentum, slammed into the rocks with a deafening crash, stunned momentarily. The human took advantage of the opportunity, quickly climbing to higher ground and using his surroundings to keep himself out of the creature's reach. Breathing heavily, the human watched as the creature growled and thrashed in frustration. It was clear that the simulation was designed to test not only his physical abilities, but also his intelligence and adaptability. He had used the environment, his knowledge of basic survival tactics, and his quick thinking to evade the beast. He had passed the first test. But there were more challenges to come. The voice from the simulation spoke again. "Test complete. Proceed to the next challenge." The human didn't have time to relax. He was already scanning his surroundings, anticipating what might come next. The Zorathians were not known for making things easy, and he was certain that the worst was yet to come. The challenges kept coming, each more difficult than the last, but the human envoy remained focused. He had survived the first challenge, a deadly encounter with a strange creature, by using his wits and the environment around him. As the simulation progressed, he faced trials that tested not only his survival skills, but also his intellect, strategy, and adaptability. Each time he overcame an obstacle, the voice in the simulation would announce, "Test complete." Proceed to the next challenge. But the human knew that the true test lay not in surviving these individual encounters, but in what would come next, what the princess had planned for him. The Zorathians were known for their meticulous, calculated nature. They did not make mistakes when it came to tests like this. The human understood that this was not just about impressing the princess. It was about proving that humanity had the potential to stand on equal footing with the Zorathians in the galaxy. He had to succeed, not just for himself, but for his people. The alliance with the Zorathian Empire would change everything for humanity. It would give them a foothold in the galaxy, a chance to grow and thrive alongside the greatest powers in the universe. He moved cautiously through the barren landscape, the wind howling around him. The sky had shifted to a deep purple, the strange clouds swirling above in patterns he could not decipher. He couldn't afford to relax even for a moment. Each new challenge was a lesson, and each lesson brought him closer to the ultimate goal. He knew the princess was watching, waiting for him to fail. But he would not fail. He had faced too much in his life to let this opportunity slip through his fingers. As he made his way forward, the ground beneath him began to shake again. This time, the tremors were stronger, and he quickly realized that something far more dangerous was approaching. He didn't need to look around to know that the simulation was introducing a new threat, something much more dangerous than the creature he had faced earlier. The voice in the simulation spoke again, its tone cold and emotionless. "Warning, new threat detected. Prepare for battle." The human's pulse quickened, but he didn't panic. Instead, he dropped to one knee and scanned his surroundings, looking for a way to gain an advantage. There was no time to waste. He had learned that in situations like this, hesitation meant defeat. The princess had given him an opportunity to prove humanity's worth. He wasn't about to waste it. Ahead of him, a massive, metallic creature emerged from the ground, its body glinting in the strange light. It stood taller than any human, its sharp claws gleaming as it moved toward him with terrifying speed. It was a machine, not a living creature like the one before, and its movements were precise, calculated. The human had faced machines before, human-made weapons and machines during warfare. But this was different. This was an alien construct, designed for a purpose that he could not yet understand. It didn't make any noise as it approached, but he could feel the intensity of its presence. It was a hunter, and he was the prey. The human didn't hesitate. He reached for a small device strapped to his belt, an emergency energy weapon, one of the few tools available to him in the simulation. He activated it, the weapon humming to life as it powered up. The metallic creature's glowing eyes locked onto him as it charged, its massive frame moving with surprising speed. The human raised the weapon, aiming for the creature's head, but he knew that simply firing wouldn't be enough. He needed to outthink it to use strategy. As the creature closed in, the human leapt to the side, narrowly avoiding the swipe of its claws. The machine's movements were fast, but they were also predictable. It was designed to hunt, but not to think. It followed a basic set of instructions, and if the human could exploit that, he might have a chance. The human darted behind a large rock formation, using it as cover. The creature paused, sensing that its prey had disappeared. It roared if a machine could be said to roar, its metal jaws opening wide as it scanned the area. The human crouched low, waiting for the perfect moment. He knew the creature would circle the rock, its sensors searching for him, and when it did, he would strike. For several tense moments, the creature moved in a slow circle, its head swiveling back and forth as it searched for its target. The human's heartbeat echoed in his ears, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had been trained for situations like this. Patience was key. At last, the creature came around the other side of the rock, its glowing eyes locking onto him just as he sprang into action. The human didn't waste any time. He fired the energy weapon directly at the creature's head. The blast hit with a deafening crack, but the creature didn't fall. Instead, it staggered back, its metal body absorbing most of the energy. The human cursed under his breath. He had underestimated it, but he didn't have time to dwell on that mistake. The creature was already recovering and charging toward him once again. He needed to think quickly. The weapon had been effective, but not enough to disable the machine. The human scanned the area around him, his mind working at lightning speed. There was another object nearby, a large, cylindrical structure partially buried in the ground. It wasn't much, but it might provide the opportunity he needed. Without hesitation, he dashed toward it, his legs pumping furiously as he closed the distance between himself and the object. The creature followed, its claws scraping the ground as it pursued him. The human reached the cylindrical structure and quickly slid behind it, using it as a barrier between him and the machine. He knew the creature's sensors were good, but they weren't infallible. As he crouched behind the structure, he used his remaining energy to power up the weapon again. He aimed carefully, knowing that this would be his last shot. When the creature appeared in front of him, its massive form blocking out the light, the human didn't hesitate. He fired once more, this time targeting the creature's joints, its weak points. The blast hit its left leg and the machine faltered, its movement slowing. The human fired again, this time at its other leg. With a screech of metal, the creature collapsed to the ground, its massive body crumpling beneath it. It struggled for a moment, but it was clear that the human had won. The voice in the simulation spoke once more, its tone flat and emotionless. Test complete. Proceed to the next challenge. The human stood slowly, breathing heavily but maintaining his composure. He had done it. He had defeated the machine using his wits, his training, and his quick thinking. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. And with each challenge he overcame, he could feel the princess's eyes on him, watching, judging. This was more than just a test of strength. It was a test of humanity's potential, its ability to adapt, to survive, and to thrive. As the simulation faded and the surroundings returned to their original state, the human found himself back in the royal palace, standing before the princess. Her gaze was unwavering, but there was something in her eyes that wasn't there before: respect. She had watched him closely, seeing firsthand what humanity was capable of. The test had not been easy, but he had passed it. And now, for the first time, the princess was beginning to see humanity not as a species to be dismissed, but as a species that could stand alongside the greatest powers in the galaxy. The human didn't speak at first. He stood tall, his expression calm but focused. He knew this was the moment of truth. The princess had seen his strength, his intelligence, and his resourcefulness. Now it was up to her to decide if humanity truly had a place in the galaxy. The princess was the first to speak, her voice steady but filled with a new sense of understanding. "You have proven yourself," she said, her words carrying the weight of a decision long awaited. "Humanity is not what I expected. You are not just a race to be dismissed. You are a force to be reckoned with." The human nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, Princess. I only ask that you give humanity the chance to prove that we can be an ally to the Zorathian Empire. Together, we can accomplish things neither of us could achieve alone." The princess studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. She had seen his potential, but she needed to be sure. She needed to be certain that this was not a fleeting moment, a flash of brilliance that would fade with time. And then, at last, she spoke again. "An alliance between our people could indeed be powerful, but it will take time, it will take trust. And it will take mutual understanding." The human smiled. "I understand, Princess, and I am willing to take that time. Humanity is ready." The princess nodded slowly. "Then let us begin."